the Reading Corner today, I'm really delighted to be welcoming back Ewa Jozefkowicz, and we're going to be talking about her new book. Ewa, you probably remember, is the author of Mystery of the Colour Thief, The Key to Finding Jack, and The Cooking Club Detectives. Her new story is called The Dragon in the Bookshop, and it's a time slip story and one that is very close to Ewa's heart, but I'm going to invite her to talk about that. But before we get into the detail of this story, tell us about it in your own words, Ewa.
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, for the really warm welcome. It's great to be back on the podcast. So yes, as you say, The Dragon in the Bookshop is my latest book. It's out on the 7th of July. And it's one that's particularly close to my heart because it's based very much on my own personal experience of losing my dad when I was a teenager. I was in secondary school at the time. So the story is about a boy called Konrad who goes through that same grieving process after the loss of his dad. And he finds himself really very lost. So everyone tries to be supportive. His mum does her best. His friends, sort of try to carry on as normal, inviting him to football matches, walking to school with him. But he's going through a really, really tough time. And actually, he stopped speaking, which is something that I experienced myself because I just sort of felt like I couldn't communicate with the world at the time. And Konrad is particularly drawn to his dad's bookshop because his dad was a bookseller like my own dad. And he decides to go back to his dad's bookshop. And something quite magical happens there, which we can go on to talk about.
We will. Let's talk about some of those issues that you've just mentioned there, first of all. I was interested that as it is such a personal story, you chose to make your protagonist a boy. Was that a way of distancing yourself a little bit from the story, or did it just feel natural that it was a male character?
It's a very good question, actually. I feel in a way, possibly because the story was very, very much based on my own experience, and so much of it is almost exactly what happened to me. Even with the job of Konrad's dad, I feel like I needed to have some differences. So I think that was a subtle way, as you say, of maybe getting some distance. But I was also actually doing a number of school visits before writing the book. They were mainly still virtual at the time, but I was on several occasions asked the question why all of my protagonists are girls. And there wasn't actually a reason for it, I thought. It was just something that had happened. And I thought it would be quite interesting to try a male protagonist. So I decided to do that in this book.
When you say to try a male protagonist, were there any differences in writing from the boy's perspective, or did you find it's just like developing any good character?
It is about developing a good character. I think essentially there's, it's about the person rather than the gender. But I did feel that I wanted to, sort of have both male and female protagonists in my stories, and I wanted this time to try writing a boy. I've also got 4 nephews who just so happen to be roughly Con's age. So they're, sort of between the ages of 9 and 11. And so I feel like I've got a good basis of, sort of understanding what being a boy of that age might be like. Obviously, I'll never truly know, but yes, I wanted to sort of partly base it also on my nephews.
As you say, Con has selective mutism caused by the trauma in his life. And as the story goes through, we see that being reversed, first of all, by being able to communicate with a good friend. And people often don't understand, do they, that it's not that you don't want to speak necessarily. This is how I understand it. And I've just read another book which has selective mutism as one of its themes, but that you can't rather than don't want to. Is that what it was like for you? And is that what it's like for Con?
Yes, it's definitely the case that you can't. I have quite vivid memories of one particular friend of mine, bless her, who was lovely and tried to be incredibly supportive. and I would travel to school with her, and she was always trying so hard with me to, you know, engage in conversation, and I wanted to respond, but I just couldn't. I just didn't feel, you know, that what I was saying made any sense. I know that in itself sounds a bit bizarre, but I just felt like I didn't quite belong to that world anymore. I think that's the best way of describing it. And she ended up just, you know, sort of monologuing in the back of the car sometimes. And Con's friends are similar. They, you know, they try to do the same thing. There's one friend that he walks to school with, and that friend also, you know, tries to talk, but also just sometimes just walks in silence and accepts that that's what Con is like, and just waits patiently in the hope that things will get better, and that his friend will return to the way that he was before.
I mean, he starts talking to Maya in this story. What's the sort of trigger for him that feels that this is somebody that he can talk to?
I think with Maya, it's the case of her being somebody who's absolutely brand new in his life, who has no expectations of him, no knowledge of what he was like before, initially no knowledge of the awful event that has led him to be the way that he currently is. And I think it's that sort of outsider's perspective that makes him want to open up, because he feels that yeah, as I say, there's no expectations, so anything that he does do will just, you know, be accepted, which I think is so important. And actually I think that links, I didn't realize this as I was writing her character, but I think it links to this really important role that you know, a therapist or a counselor can play in the life of a bereaved child. And perhaps later we could go on to talk about Grief Encounter, which is a charity that I'm looking to support through this book, and raise awareness of some of the work that they do with children who have lost someone they love.
Tell us about that now. That would be lovely.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course. So Grief Encounter is a lovely charity that I found out about whilst working in the education sector several years ago. So I worked for a support service for senior leaders in schools, and I was also a school governor for several years. And I just felt like if that charity had been around when I was you know, at school, I just think it would have made such a world of difference, because I think that crucial element for me that was missing is having, you know, this outsider's point of view, of somebody who doesn't know you, who won't have any, you know, sort of prior judgment of, you know, what you were like before versus what you are now, or what you are like now. And crucially also, that particular charity brings together people that have gone through similar experiences. So there are, you know, family days out, there are events, there are book clubs, you know, not to mention, of course, the Grief Talk helpline, which is a sort of direct helpline to a therapist. So I think it's so important for those two reasons.
It's an important element of the story, and thanks for telling us about that charity, and it's great to hear that you're supporting it. I don't want our listeners to think that that's all the story is about. In fact, there are lots of happy memories connected with Con's dad, and you know, one of the bits that I really enjoyed was the way that you recreate the magic of bookshops and the magic of books. It's a bit of a love story to bookshops, and your bookshop is called A Likely Story.
Yes, I very much based it on my dad's bookshop, which, you know, was not by any means, it didn't have a funny name like that, and was quite different because it was in a city, whereas Con lives out in the countryside on the coast. But you're absolutely right. I have always loved bookshops and libraries. And because my dad was a bookseller, I would spend many half terms and school holidays in his bookshop. And I always fancied myself as a bit of a Matilda, because I was reading my way through the children's section, and I was always the first one to find out about lots of exciting titles, including Harry Potter, actually, who my dad, you know, sort of gave me the first book when I was 11, and I brought it into school in year 7, and, you know, and said, guys, this is going to be massive. And they were like, oh, you always say that it's going to be massive because you're always reading brilliant stories. And I was like, no, this one's going to be different. And lo and behold, it was huge. So yes, but going back to to bookshops. I just think they're such magical places. There's so much to be discovered there, so many worlds hidden in among the pages. And something that my dad used to always say to me, which is the quote actually on the cover of the proof that you have there, is that for every person, every reader, there's a character in a book that matches them almost entirely, and it's just a case of finding them, which I thought was such a brilliant mission to send me on, because I was always sort of thinking, oh, maybe it's this person, maybe it's this person, and then I would think, oh, it's not quite right, and so I'll be enticed to keep reading.
It's really interesting you should say that. I've written that quote down large on my sheet of paper here, because it really set me thinking. You touch base with lots of characters that you read about, but I don't think I have yet discovered the character that is exactly like me. And it's kind of sending me on a quest, because I hadn't, I never really thought about that before. You're like lots of different characters in lots of different ways, but that perfect match, not yet. Have you found your perfect match?
I haven't yet found my perfect match, no. There have been, but interestingly, throughout my life, the sort of characters that I sort of felt closest to have really changed. So I started out, I think, when my dad sort of first said that to me, I was absolutely adamant that it was Pippi Longstocking, because there were various quirks that I was amazed that she did the same thing. So for example, I used to sleep upside down in my bed when I was sort of 6 or 7 with my feet on the pillow. And Pippi Longstocking did the same. And I sort of thought, oh my goodness, amazing. It's definitely her. But they changed throughout the years. And I think that's the magic of it, that you just have to keep looking.
And of course, Pippi Longstocking is an intrepid explorer as well. And part of this book is about being an intrepid explorer and never letting fear overwhelm them.
Yes, fear stand in the way. Absolutely. I was quite an anxious child, actually, and books were very helpful in trying to overcome that anxiety and do brave things that I otherwise may not have done. And I think that's something that my dad helped me out with as well.
Now, there's a legend at the heart of this story. It's a real legend. It's the Dragon of Krakow, and that this becomes really key to the plot. And Con hears this story from his father. Maybe you could tell us a bit about the legend.
It's about a dragon who suddenly appears in Krakow, in medieval Krakow, and he makes a home for himself in the cave below the castle. So this is in the time when Poland still very much had a monarchy, and this is allegedly a real king who lived in the Middle Ages. He was called King Krak, and he was actually the king that gave his name to the city. So he lived obviously with his courtiers, his family, and so on in this castle, directly above the cave in which the dragon dwelled. And everyone in the entire city was absolutely petrified of the dragon. So the dragon had an insatiable appetite. So he was, sort of eating everyone out of house and home. They, bought him piles of food every day. He had, entire cows in one sitting. And there are various sort of versions of the legend in which, sort of scarier versions say that he also captured people and ate them, which is, sort of a version that I didn't actually explore in my story. But I always wondered, because the legend didn't touch on why he was there. Because I thought it's quite random. Even as a small child, I sort of thought it's quite strange for a dragon to suddenly just make him, sort of make his home in a city where there are no other dragons. He clearly is alone and lost and finds himself among people who are scared of him. It's not a nice situation to be in. And I felt like there was this whole other untold backstory to do with this dragon, which I thought I would quite like to explore.
So Maya, Con's friend, is a little like you there, because she's the one that starts to say, well, they didn't treat him very nicely. They got rid of him, but they tortured him by making him drink all of this water because he was so thirsty from eating the sulfur injected food. Yes. And, she feels sorry for him.
She does, absolutely, because as you say, in the original legend, after many, many attempts to get rid of the dragon that fail, there is the successful attempt where they stuff a lamb filled with sulfur and, and the dragon eats it and then, effectively dies as a result of drinking the whole Vistula River dry. So yes, but as you say, Maya has a very different approach to it, which is effectively the way that I thought about the story.
We'll come back to the dragon in a little while, but we start to see perhaps some connections to the legend when Con discovers a claw print, which we think is a dinosaur claw print of some description. This also links us back to the bookshop and how you can find things out in bookshops and libraries. What is it that he's found?
Well, so this part was actually inspired by a story not so long ago, which you might remember, that was on the news about a little girl who discovered a dinosaur footprint on the rocks, basically by the coast. And I thought, isn't that a wonderful discovery? That's, sort of literally so many thousands of years have passed since that footprint was made, and yet it's still there. So I wanted to incorporate it into my story, and I wanted to make it a bit of an unknown as to what kind of creature made this footprint. And as we mentioned previously, Con is an intrepid explorer, and he used to, make all sorts of discoveries with his dad when they would go on trips around the coast. And this is something that his dad would have absolutely loved, because he loved dinosaurs, which is why it's, all the more devastating that he's not there to witness it. But Con takes photos of this print. He's really fascinated by it. And the print is very much real. It's just a case of sort of him trying to figure out who made it.
I think I'd like to hear a little bit of the story. Now, you are going to read us a section. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what leads up to this bit of the story.
Yeah, of course. So this section that I'm about to read, Con decides that he will invite Maya to his dad's bookshop. The bookshop is sadly about to be closed because Con's mum has decided that she just can't do it justice. So his dad used to run it in an amazing way. He was known as the book matchmaker, so he always found the ideal book for each of his customers. And his mum, who has a very different job and very different interests, just feels like she won't be able to run it in the same way. So she's decided to sell it, and Con takes Maya on a final visit to the bookshop because it's such a special place to him. And Maya hasn't really been much of a reader to date. She admits that she loves stories, but she struggles a bit with reading. And she hasn't, it seems as though, she hasn't had much of an opportunity to develop her passion for reading. So Con's decided to change this. So this is what happens. He gives her a range of different titles, and he encourages her to find a book that will pique her interest and spark her love of reading. And here we go. I read her some of my favorite bits from Northern Lights, and she read the opening of some adult books because she liked the titles. She thought that I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings might list all the reasons on the first page, and that Catch 22 was mysterious because so many other catches had come before it. Why is the 22nd one so special? She asked, her eyebrows raised. Don't you want to find out? Then I spotted my pile of books in the corner. I scanned the spines and I knew what they were even before I read the note on the top, scrawled in Mum's handwriting, to take home for Con. These are yours to keep? Asked Maya appreciatively. It was a mix of stories I loved when I was younger, a couple of books from the dinosaur section and a few titles I'd picked up when I was last at the shop, meaning to read them but forgetting to take them home. I wondered how Mum knew. Maybe I could borrow some of these after you finished, asked Maya hopefully. Yes, for sure. But what's this one, she asked, pulling out a book from the middle of the pile. Look at it, it's beautiful. She handed it to me, and I ran my fingers over the silky green cover. My heart stopped. Tiny footprints embossed in gold, stamped around the edges of the cover, shaped just like the one that I'd found. I turned the book over, checking the spine, but strangely there was no title. This book wasn't new like the others. It looked very old, as if it had come from the distant past, when dragons and magic might have existed. When I finally dared to open it, the thin yellow paper crackled beneath my fingers and gave out a sweet, musty smell. I turned carefully to the title page, where there was a picture of a dragon. It was so detailed and intricate that I could see every muscle in the dragon's body. It had magnificent gleaming orange scales and vast sweeping wings. His yellow eyes sent goosebumps down my spine. This wasn't just any dragon. And then what happens is that Konrad starts reading the legend which is within the story, and he gets transported into an entirely different world.
And I love the way that transportation happened, because there's no fireworks or strange feelings. There's just this sudden awareness that the light has changed. That's what you describe it as.
Yes.
And I know as I was reading, I was thinking, the day is ending, it's getting darker outside. And then you read on and you realize they're in a different place, their clothes have changed. And then you realize that clue, the light, wasn't really referring to the passing of time.
Yes, exactly. I wanted it to be quite a smooth transition, and then for everything to be quite unexpected, both for the reader and for the characters. And then, of course, they're plunged into the legend itself, as it were.
So we won't say too much about that, because we'd like people to read it and enjoy it. But I think we can probably say that part of their reason for being there might be to bring about a different kind of ending to the legend.
Exactly. That's exactly what they set out to do. That's their quest. And what I think readers might find interesting is that they have very different ideas about how to go about that.
One of the things that I really loved in the story at the beginning was your wonderful sense of place, the coastline. You described the wind, just a paragraph, and the wind is almost personified in that passage. And I got a real sense of, the beach, and it was very specific, the redness of the beach. When you go back in time, did you have to do much research to create the same sense of place?
I did. Do you know what? I actually went to Krakow with a friend of mine, and I spent some time there. And what's really fascinating is that there is a cave below the castle that you can visit. And a lot of that part of the city actually has remained intact. Unlike other cities in Poland, it wasn't destroyed in the Second World War. And the old town itself, the medieval town, is still there, and by all accounts looks much the same. So it was lovely to actually walk around some of those cobbled streets and try to imagine it in the way that it would have been, back in the Middle Ages. But I also did a lot of historical research into, what life was like in that time, what medicine was like, what bookmaking was like, because interestingly, one of the characters is a scribe. So all of that was deeply fascinating.
And did you research far more than you could end up using in your story?
Oh, yes, that's always the case. And you think it's such a shame because there are so many different elements that you could touch on. But obviously you want to keep it relevant to the story itself.
It's a great read, and it's also very moving. Having written the book now and it's about to be published, coming back to your personal story, was there any sense of catharsis in writing this story?
Yes, absolutely. It was actually a story that my publisher had encouraged me to write for quite a while, and I think it took me some time to think of what the right story would be for expressing my feelings at the time. I'm really glad that I wrote it. It has been a very cathartic experience. This is a book that's very much about my dad and about, sort of a love of reading and a love of bookshops, as we've been discussing. But actually, I don't think that any of my books would have necessarily been written if it wasn't for him. Because I think you often need somebody in your life to encourage a passion. And, those passions could be anything, could be sport, could be music. In my case, it was reading. And it was something that my dad discovered that I loved doing from a very early age. But I think if he hadn't really ignited my love of reading, I think I probably wouldn't have become an author. So it's it's almost a bit of a, I don't know, like a bit of a thank you, I suppose, to him for putting me on that path.
Well, it's a really lovely book, and I wish you all the success with it when it's published. In the meantime, thank you so much for talking to me again, Ewa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.